Today, we're going to explore two chilling true crime cases involving serial offenders. Let's begin with the first case. In the quiet neighborhoods of Wichita, Kansas, families lived normal lives until someone started watching. Between 1974 and 1991, a man calling himself BTK, Bind, Torture, and End Lives, turned ordinary homes into crime scenes. This wasn't just about taking lives. This was about power, control, and a twisted game lasting 3 decades. On January 15, 1974, 4 members of the Otero family were found deceased in their home. Parents, Joseph and Julie, along with 2 of their children, had been bound and harmed. The scene was so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to process it. But what made this truly terrifying was the realization that whoever did this wanted credit. He wanted attention. And he was just getting started. For 31 years, BTK remained a ghost. He would strike, then disappear for years. But he couldn't stay quiet. He sent letters to police and newspapers, providing details only the perpetrator could know. He taunted investigators, described his actions in disturbing detail, and created a unique signature for himself. The community lived in fear. Parents installed new locks. Everyone wondered, who is BTK? A neighbor, a coworker? The answer shocked everyone. BTK wasn't a drifter or obvious threat. He was someone who blended in perfectly, with a family, a job, and a respected position in the community. What makes this case chilling is that BTK lived among potential victims for decades. He attended church regularly, worked in compliance enforcing city codes, had a wife and 2 children. Neighbors described him as helpful, maybe strict, but normal. No one suspected that behind this facade was someone responsible for some of the most calculated crimes in American history. But BTK made one critical mistake. After years of silence, he couldn't resist communicating again in 2004. This decision would lead to his capture. How did investigators finally connect the dots? What technology identified someone who evaded justice for 3 decades? And what drove an apparently normal family man to commit such terrible acts? How does someone live a double life for over 30 years? What signs did people miss? How did investigators finally catch someone so careful? And perhaps most importantly, could this happen again? These questions demand answers as we explore one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern American history. The story of Dennis Rader, the man who called himself BTK. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He was the oldest of 4 sons born to William and Dorothea Rader. His childhood appeared unremarkable from the outside. The family was working class, and Dennis grew up in typical Midwestern surroundings. But even in his early years, concerning behaviors emerged that would hint at what was to come. His father worked for Kansas Gas and Electric, providing a stable income for the family. His mother was a homemaker who raised the 4 boys. They lived in a small house in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else. It was the kind of American childhood that looked perfect on the surface. Little League baseball, church on Sundays, neighborhood kids playing in the streets. But beneath this normal exterior, Dennis was developing disturbing interests that he kept carefully hidden. As a child, Dennis displayed troubling behaviors. He harmed animals, a behavior that psychologists now recognize as a serious warning sign. He would capture stray cats and dogs and take them to a barn where he would tie them up and harm them. This wasn't childhood curiosity. It was rehearsal for what he would later do to human beings. He also developed disturbing fantasies involving bondage and control from a very young age. These thoughts consumed him, but he kept them hidden from family and friends. To everyone else, he seemed like a quiet, somewhat awkward boy who kept to himself. He was never popular, never the center of attention, but he wasn't considered strange enough to raise serious concerns. He was just Dennis. Quiet, forgettable, unremarkable. As Dennis grew into adolescence, his fantasies intensified. He began what he would later call his trolling behavior, walking around neighborhoods at night, looking into windows, watching people. He stole women's undergarments from clotheslines, taking them home to use in his private fantasies. He became obsessed with bondage imagery and detective magazines that featured women in distress. In school, Dennis was an average student. He wasn't particularly intelligent or particularly struggling. He was simply there, floating through without making much of an impression on anyone. Teachers barely remembered him. Classmates didn't think about him much at all. This ability to be forgettable, to avoid drawing attention, would serve him well in his later criminal activities. After graduating from high school in 1963, Dennis attended Kansas Wesleyan University for a brief period, but didn't complete his degree at that time. He worked various jobs, never settling into anything permanent. He was still living at home, still developing his dark fantasies, still watching and waiting for the right opportunity to act on them. In 1966, Dennis joined the United States Air Force. He served until 1970, spending time stationed in various locations including Alabama, Texas, and even a brief period in Japan and Greece. His military service was unremarkable. He received an honorable discharge and returned to Kansas. But during this time, his dark fantasies continued to develop and intensify. The military provided structure and discipline that Dennis craved. He performed his duties adequately and followed orders without complaint. He was never a standout soldier, but he was never a problem either. Once again, he was invisible, just another serviceman doing his job. But in his private moments, his thoughts were consumed by fantasies of control and domination. While stationed in Alabama, he took a correspondence course in electronics, gaining knowledge that would later help him bypass alarm systems and understand how police investigations worked. He was already planning, already preparing, even though he hadn't yet committed his first crime. In 1971, Dennis married Paula Dietz. They had met through a friend, and Paula found Dennis to be stable and reliable, qualities she valued. The couple seemed like any other young married pair starting their lives together. They would eventually have 2 children, a son named Brian, born in 1975, and a daughter named Carrie, born in 1978. Paula worked as a bookkeeper, and Dennis pursued various jobs. From all outward appearances, they were a normal American family building a life in Wichita, Kansas. Paula had no idea about the thoughts consuming her husband's mind. Dennis was skilled at compartmentalization, keeping his family life completely separate from his dark urges. At home, he was a husband and father. In his mind, he was planning crimes, making lists of potential victims, and preparing for the day when he would finally act on his fantasies. By the early 1970s, Dennis had developed what he called his Factor X, his term for the compulsion that drove him to harm others. He spent years planning, fantasizing, and preparing. He created lists of potential victims, calling them his projects. He drove around neighborhoods, watching people, learning their routines, identifying homes where he might strike. He was patient, methodical, and calculating. Dennis studied true crime extensively. He read about other offenders, analyzing what led to their capture. He was particularly interested in forensic science and police procedures. He wanted to understand how investigations worked so he could stay ahead of law enforcement. He watched true crime television shows and took notes. He studied newspaper accounts of unsolved cases, learning from the mistakes of others. He assembled what he called hit kits, bags containing rope, guns, tape, knives, and other items he would need. He stored these kits in various locations, ready to use when the opportunity arose. Everything was carefully planned. He had escape routes mapped out. He knew which neighborhoods had the least police patrols. He understood how to disable phone lines and alarm systems. Dennis also began practicing his technique. He would break into homes when no one was there, just to prove he could do it. He would move items around, leaving subtle signs that someone had been there, though nothing obvious enough to make people call the police. This was part of his fantasy, being inside someone's private space without their knowledge, having that power and control. And in January 1974, after years of planning and fantasizing, Dennis was finally ready to act on his darkest urges. He had selected his first victims, the Otero family. He had watched them, learned their routines, and prepared his plan. The line between fantasy and reality was about to be crossed, and once crossed, there would be no going back. On a cold morning in January, Dennis drove to 803 North Edgemore Street in Wichita. The Otero family lived there, Joseph, Julie, and their children. Dennis had been watching the house for weeks. He knew the father and some of the older children would leave for work and school early in the morning, but he believed the mother would be home alone with the younger children. Joseph Otero was 38 years old, a father of 5 who had served in the Air Force before working at Coleman Company. Julie was 34, a devoted mother who had relocated with her family from Puerto Rico years earlier. They had built a good life in Wichita, raising their children in a safe neighborhood. Their older children, Danny, Carmen, and Charlie, were responsible teenagers who helped take care of their younger siblings. That morning, Dennis parked his car several blocks away and walked to the Otero home. He was dressed in casual clothes that wouldn't stand out. He carried his hit kit in a bag. He had cut the phone line the night before to prevent anyone from calling for help. Everything was going according to plan. He cut the phone line and broke into the home through a side door. But his plan immediately went wrong. Joseph Otero hadn't left for work yet. He was running late that morning, a simple twist of fate that put him in his home when Dennis entered. Dennis was confronted by the entire family: Joseph, Julie, 11-year-old Josephine, and 9-year-old Jose Jr. In that moment, Dennis could have fled. He could have apologized and left, abandoning his plan. But instead, he made a choice that would set him on a path of destruction. He pulled out a gun and convinced the family he was a wanted criminal who just needed money and a car. He promised he wouldn't harm them if they cooperated. The Oteros, terrified but hoping to survive, did as he asked. Dennis bound each family member with rope he had brought in his kit. He tied their hands and feet, making it impossible for them to fight back or escape. He placed them in different rooms of the house. Joseph was in the master bedroom. Julie was in the bedroom with Josephine. Young Jose Jr. was in another room. What happened next was calculated and cruel. Dennis had not come just to rob the family or to take a car. He had come to fulfill his dark fantasies, to have complete control over other human beings, to dominate them, to experience the ultimate power of deciding whether they lived or ceased to exist. He took the life of Joseph first, using the rope to strangle him in the bedroom. Joseph fought as much as he could while bound, But Dennis was stronger and had the element of surprise. Then Dennis went to Julie and ended her life in the same manner while her daughter watched in horror. The psychological torture of making Josephine witness her mother's final moments was part of his desire for total control. Then he went after the children. 9-year-old Jose Jr. was found with a plastic bag over his head, bound and strangled. Finally, Dennis took 11-year-old Josephine to the basement. He hung her from a pipe, making her final moments even more terrifying. He took photographs of her, keeping them as souvenirs of his crime. The scene he left behind was so disturbing that it traumatized the first officers who responded. Evidence of bondage, the positioning of bodies, the clear signs of prolonged suffering. Everything pointed to someone who didn't just want to end lives, but wanted to torture and control his victims before ending them. 3 older Otero children, 15-year-old Charlie, 14-year-old Danny, and 13-year-old Carmen, were at school and work that day. They had left that morning thinking it would be an ordinary day. Charlie came home first around lunchtime and discovered the horror inside his house. He found his family and immediately called the police from a neighbor's house. The Wichita Police Department responded quickly. Officers who entered the home were experienced professionals who had seen many crime scenes, but nothing had prepared them for this. The level of planning, the brutality, the evidence of torture. This was unlike anything they had encountered before. Detective Bernie Drowatsky was one of the first investigators on the scene. He quickly realized this was not a typical crime. There was minimal evidence of forced entry. Dennis had been careful. Nothing appeared to be stolen, ruling out robbery as a motive. The binding and positioning of the bodies suggested someone who had planned this carefully and who had specific, disturbing motivations. A task force assembled but faced challenges. No witnesses, cut phone lines, few fingerprints, useless without a suspect. The community panicked. Parents kept children home. People installed locks. Safety evaporated overnight. BTK struck again in April 1974, attacking Catherine Bright in her home. Her brother fought back and survived, but Catherine lost her life. Later that year, BTK sent a letter to a newspaper, claiming responsibility and naming himself BTK. In 1977, he killed Shirley Vian and Nancy Fox. After reporting one victim to police himself, BTK disappeared again, leaving Wichita in fear. For years, BTK lived quietly. He worked, raised his children, attended church, and blended into the community. No one suspected him. But the violence had not ended. In 1985, he killed Maureen Hedge, a neighbor he had watched for years. In 1986, he killed Vicki Wiggerly, pretending to be a service worker. In 1991, Dolores Davis became his last known victim. Then, BTK went silent for over a decade. In 2004, a newspaper story about the Otero family anniversary brought BTK back. He began sending letters and evidence proving he was the killer. Police reopened the case with new technology. In 2005, BTK sent a floppy disk, believing it could not be traced. He was wrong. The disk led investigators directly to Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader was arrested in February 2005 near his home. He confessed quickly and in detail, speaking without emotion. He described his crimes calmly, showing no real remorse. Rader was charged with 10 counts of murder. Because of state law, he could not receive the death penalty. Rader was sentenced to 10 life terms and will never be released. He lives in isolation for safety. His family was devastated, and victims' families were left with lifelong trauma. Rader remains focused on his own image rather than the suffering he caused. The BTK case shows how dangerous people can hide in plain sight. Early warning signs were ignored, and his need for attention eventually exposed him. This case reminds us that awareness, technology, and community vigilance can help prevent future tragedies. The BTK case reminds us that awareness and community vigilance can save lives. Share this video to help others understand warning signs and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Subscribe to stay informed about true crime cases and lessons we can learn. Together, we can work toward a safer future and honor the memory of those lost. Now, let's move on to the second disturbing true crime story. In the wealthy neighborhood of Woodley Park, Washington, D.C., just blocks from the vice president's residence, firefighters responded to a massive blaze on May 14, 2015. The multi-million-dollar mansion was engulfed in flames, but what they discovered inside would shock the nation's capital to its core. 3 bodies were found in one bedroom, bound with duct tape, showing signs of severe harm. A 4th victim, barely clinging to life, was rushed to the hospital, but would not survive. These weren't just any victims. This was the Savopoulos family, successful business owners living the American dream, along with their devoted housekeeper. But this wasn't an accident. This was something far more sinister. The evidence told a horrifying story. For 19 terrifying hours, from the evening of May 13th until the afternoon of May 14th, 4 innocent people were held prisoner in their own home. Savopoulos, age 46, was the CEO of American Iron Works. His wife, Amy, 47, was a loving mother. Their 10-year-old son, Philip, was just a child. And Veralicia Figueroa, 57, their housekeeper, was simply there doing her job. The adults were restrained to chairs. A baseball bat covered in evidence was found at the scene. A samurai sword from Savas's collection showed signs of use. Pizza boxes sat near the victims, a chilling detail that would later crack the case wide open. And young Philip? The autopsy would reveal he suffered both sharp force injuries and thermal harm. Investigators believe he may have been harmed while still conscious, used as leverage to force his father to cooperate. Text messages sent from the family's phones during the captivity told a strange story. The longtime family housekeeper, Nelitza Gutierrez, received messages telling her not to come to work, something that raised her suspicions immediately. At 9:14 p.m. on May 13th, 2 pizzas were ordered from Domino's with unusual instructions. Leave them on the porch, ring the doorbell, and leave. No contact, no interaction. On the morning of May 14th, Savas's assistant, Jordan Wallace, received a voicemail with specific instructions. He was to withdraw $40,000 in cash from the company account and deliver it to the house. Wallace did exactly as instructed, leaving the money in a Porsche parked in the garage around 10:15 a.m. He never saw his boss. He had no idea what was happening inside. Who could commit such evil? Why target this particular family? What kind of person holds a 10-year-old child hostage for money? And here's the most disturbing part. Even after the $40,000 was delivered, the offender didn't leave. Instead, every single person in that house lost their life, and the mansion was set ablaze to destroy evidence. The case would become known as the D.C. Mansion Murders, one of the most brutal home invasions in recent American history. The hunt for the criminal would span multiple states. The DNA evidence would point to someone with a dark past and a connection to the family. And the trial would reveal details so shocking that even seasoned prosecutors called it one of the most heinous offenses they'd ever seen. What drove someone to commit such unspeakable acts? How did investigators track down the offender? And what secrets would the trial reveal about the 19 hours of terror inside that mansion? Savopoulos built his success from the ground up. As CEO of American Iron Works, a construction company specializing in large commercial and government buildings in Hyattsville, Maryland, he provided well for his family. He also owned a martial arts studio in Chantilly, Virginia. The family lived in a $4.5 million mansion in Woodley Park, one of DC's most prestigious neighborhoods. Amy Savopoulos was deeply involved in their children's lives. The couple had 3 children, 2 teenage daughters, Abigail and Katerina, who were both away at boarding school, and their youngest, 10-year-old Philip. Veralicia Figueroa, known as Vera, had worked for the family as their housekeeper and was considered part of the family. Daron Wint was born on November 27, 1980 in Guyana. He immigrated to the United States in 2000, seeking better opportunities. He joined the United States Marine Corps but was discharged before completing his training due to medical reasons. He became a certified welder, and in 2003 he was hired at American Iron Works, Savopoulos' company. From 2003 to 2005, Wint worked as a welder at the company. But his employment ended badly. According to reports, he was terminated after threatening a co-worker with a knife. This wasn't his only brush with violence. By 2015, Wint had accumulated a lengthy criminal record including second-degree assault, malicious destruction of property, and multiple theft charges. In 2009, he was convicted of assault and served 30 days in jail. After losing his job at American Iron Works, Wint struggled to maintain steady employment. He reportedly contacted the company in 2008 and 2009, asking to be rehired. He was refused. In 2010, he was arrested at a gas station directly across from American Iron Works headquarters, armed with a BB pistol and a 2-foot-long machete. The weapons charges were eventually dropped. On May 13, 2015, at approximately 5:30 p.m., Savopoulos was at his martial arts studio in Northern Virginia with housekeeper Nelitza Gutierrez. He received a call from his wife Amy, asking him to come home to watch Philip because she had plans to go out. He left the studio and headed home. What Savas didn't know was that someone was already waiting. Based on testimony from Wint's stepmother during the trial, Wint left his home early that morning and didn't return. Investigators believe he entered the Savopoulos home sometime that evening. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting he may have gained access through deception or waited for an opportunity when a door was unlocked. Amy Savopoulos arrived home and placed her coffee cup on the table, a detail captured in evidence photos that would later be released. It was at this moment she was confronted. Savas came home to a nightmare. He was immediately overpowered in the dining room. Photos released after the trial showed his blood stained on the dining room floor from the initial assault. Vera Figueroa, the housekeeper who was supposed to leave that evening, was also taken captive. The offender used duct tape to restrain the adults to chairs. Young Philip became the leverage. Evidence presented at trial suggested the child was harmed in front of his parents to force their cooperation. The family's own belongings were used as weapons: a baseball bat and a sword from Savas's samurai collection. At 9:14 p.m., Amy was forced to order 2 pizzas from Domino's. The instructions were specific and designed to avoid human contact. Leave the pizzas on the front porch, ring the doorbell, and leave. The delivery driver followed these instructions exactly. The offender ate some of the pizza, leaving a partially eaten crust, a decision that would prove to be his downfall. Throughout the night, the family and their housekeeper remained bound. Text messages were sent from their phones to prevent suspicion. Nelitza Gutierrez, who normally worked at the house, received messages from Amy's phone saying not to come in the next day. When Gutierrez called back and texted, she received no response, unusual behavior that worried her. Early on May 14th, the offender's plan moved into its next phase. Savas was forced to leave a voicemail for his assistant, Jordan Wallace, with specific instructions. Wallace was to go to American Iron Works the next morning, meet with the company's chief financial officer, and withdraw $40,000 in cash. Wallace thought the request was strange, but followed his boss's instructions. Surveillance footage from the bank showed Wallace and the CFO withdrawing the money. Wallace then drove to the Savopoulos mansion. At 10:15 a.m., he received a text from Savas's phone telling him to leave the package in the Porsche parked in the garage and then leave. Wallace placed the money on the car seat and departed. He never entered the house. He never saw anyone. What happened next inside that mansion remains the most disturbing part of this case. Despite receiving the $40,000 he demanded, the offender didn't leave. Instead, according to the prosecution's timeline, all 4 victims lost their lives sometime after the money was delivered. The medical examiner testified that Savas Savopoulos, Amy Savopoulos, and Vera Figueroa all sustained blunt force trauma and sharp force injuries before they passed away. Young Philip's autopsy revealed he suffered sharp force injuries and thermal harm. The medical examiner stated that Philip's injuries were so severe, it was difficult to determine definitively whether he was still conscious when the fire started, though evidence suggested he may have been. At approximately 1:30 p.m. on May 14th, the house was set on fire. Investigators determined the fire started in Philip's bedroom. The offender used accelerant to ensure the blaze would spread quickly and destroy evidence. He then fled the scene in the family's blue Porsche. Firefighters arrived at 1:30 p.m. to find the mansion engulfed in flames. Once the fire was controlled, they made the horrific discovery. 3 bodies were found in one bedroom: Savas, Amy, and Vera, all showing signs of severe harm and bound with duct tape. Philip's body was found in his own bedroom on the charred remains of his bed. Savas, Amy, and Philip were pronounced gone at the scene. Vera was still alive when firefighters pulled her from the house. She was given CPR and rushed to the hospital, but despite efforts to save her, she passed away from her injuries. On May 15, 2015, authorities officially classified all 4 losses as intentional acts. Retired Metropolitan Police Detective Todd Amos told investigators the scene looked like a war had taken place. The house reeked of accelerant. Evidence was scattered throughout: the bloody baseball bat, the samurai sword, the pizza boxes, duct tape, and signs of a prolonged, violent struggle. But it was what investigators found in the evidence that would break the case. The pizza boxes contained the key. A partially eaten crust was found near where the 3 adult victims had been bound. Investigators sent the crust to the lab for DNA analysis. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on May 14th, just hours after the fire, Amy Savopoulos' blue Porsche was found burning in a church parking lot in Prince George's County, Maryland. The car had been set on fire, another attempt to destroy evidence. But the offender made mistakes. Inside the burned vehicle, investigators found a construction vest. DNA analysis would later reveal Daron Wint's genetic material on that vest. They also found other items that would tie back to the scene. On May 18, 2015, investigators got the breakthrough they desperately needed. The DNA from the pizza crust and other items found at the crime scene was run through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. The results came back with a match: Daron Wint. Police immediately recognized the significance of the connection. Wint wasn't a stranger to the Savopoulos family. He had worked at American Iron Works from 2003 to 2005 before being fired for threatening a coworker. This wasn't a random crime. This was targeted. Police Chief Kathy Lanier told reporters, "Right now, it does not appear that this was just a random crime." The connection between Wint and the victims suggested a motive rooted in grudge, revenge, or familiarity with the family's wealth. On May 19, 2015, nearly a week after the offenses, Washington, D.C. police went public with Wint's name. They released his photo, a 2007 booking photo showing a man 5 feet 7 inches tall, 155 pounds, with a history of violence. They announced he was wanted for first-degree premeditated acts against the 4 victims. Police urged the public to consider him armed and extremely dangerous. On May 19th, police released Wint's name and photo. He was wanted for first-degree premeditated acts against 4 victims. Consider him armed and extremely dangerous. That same night, authorities tracked him to Brooklyn, New York. They missed him by hours. His girlfriend said he was considering turning himself in. He wasn't. Internet searches from Wint's devices painted a damning picture. How to beat a lie detector test. 10 hideout cities for fugitives. 5 countries with no U.S. extradition treaty. He also repeatedly checked news coverage of the case. Wint told his ex-fiancée he'd won the lottery. He took her shopping, bought jewelry, flashed $1,200 in $100 bills. His brother-in-law testified Wint was spending lavishly in the days after the offenses. On May 21st, investigators tracked Wint to a motel in College Park, Maryland. As they arrived, he was leaving in a white Chevrolet Cruze. A box truck traveled with him. 20 police cars and a helicopter followed for 5 miles. At 11 p.m., they surrounded both vehicles. Inside, Wint, 2 men, and 3 women. Officers found a stack of $100 bills and money orders. Wint showed no emotion as he was arrested. U.S. Marshal Robert Fernandez said Wint remained eerily calm, displaying none of the expected reactions. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: Wint's DNA on the pizza crust, construction vest, knife, and hard hat. 60 witnesses established the timeline. His internet searches for how to beat lie detector tests and hideout cities for fugitives revealed guilt. On February 18, 2016, he was indicted on 20 felony charges. The trial began September 11, 2018. The defense claimed Wint's brothers committed the crimes. Wint testified he was tricked into going to the house for a painting job. Assistant U.S. Attorney Laura Bach destroyed his story. How did his DNA get on the pizza crust if he never entered? His timeline contradicted all evidence. His brother testified against him with a solid alibi. After 6 weeks of testimony, the jury returned on October 25, 2018. Guilty on all 20 counts. Abigail and Katerina Savopoulos witnessed justice for their family. At sentencing, Abigail spoke through tears. Wint showed no remorse. Judge Juliet McKenna sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. Wint remains in federal prison and will never be released. The mansion was demolished in 2017. A single pizza crust led to justice through DNA evidence, but 4 innocent lives can never be restored. This case reminds us that awareness and vigilance can save lives. If something feels wrong, trust your instincts and contact authorities. Share this story to raise awareness about home safety and the lasting impacts of workplace violence. Subscribe to stay informed about cases that shape our understanding of criminal behavior and justice. Together, we can honor the memories of Savas, Amy, Philip, and Vera by learning from this tragedy and working to prevent future horrors.